people are ready to get away from just having a username and password. I just want to walk up, it sees me, boom, I'm in.
And actually our challenge to dynamically gift the proper secure access going forward is around authorization. Should these particular identities be accessing these assets at that point in time?
Identity is dynamic, right? It's always changing, it's shifting. If I can't log in to a support server to support the other stuff going down, then how am I supposed to do my job?
Today, I'm joined by Corey Kaemming, CISO Valvoline, who's leading a large-scale identity transformation inside a global business. We're going to talk about why identity is quietly breaking the fundamental structures of security, what it takes to rebuild it properly, and why this may be changing the role of the CISO more than anything else in security today. Identity and access is becoming this connectivity tissue to every other single control in the enterprise.
It's not just supporting my security team or the dev team, it's supporting HR, it's supporting marketing.
Attackers aren't breaking in anymore, they're logging in.
A lot of organizations from the authorization perspective are dealing with, are you who you say you are?
Welcome to the Watchtower. Corey, great to see you. How are you?
Great to see you, Ash. Grateful to be here. I'm doing well. Thank you.
Corey, for years, it seems like in our industry, we've been spending millions to restructure how we handle identity. But I think the challenge still remains. Maybe just talk us through why that is and how have we got to this position where identity has now exploded to this level of importance?
From what I've seen just over the past, 10 years or so, the shift, especially with cloud and SaaS and remote work, right? When you bring in the COVID era and everybody going remote, that really shifted every interaction to understanding like who is this? Who's connecting? Where should they connect? What should they see? And then it really gets into an understanding of like now with APIs, AI agents, as well as service accounts that are continuing to grow, you have these non-human identities that are really getting a lot of focus, not only in the market, but just in general we've seen breaches over the past couple of years that have been caused by non-management of what we call NHI, non-human identities. So the shift to being more adaptive and flexible work has now drawn into, okay, how do we manage the risk going away from just having, the lock on the door with the firewall to now being flexible and understanding who's connecting from where and what should they be able to see. So it's really putting a challenge on individuals within the security and operational space.
Right. And I know you, as well as I do, remember that when we were starting out, most of what we were dealing with were really human identities. And I guess in some cases, as it grew, human machine synergy. But we've seen a complete collapse of the human only identity model, I think. And for me, there's been like a fundamental rupture in some of the identity architecture that we now use, where identity and access is becoming this connectivity tissue to every other single control in the enterprise, both within security and actually within operations. And I think it's worth delving into sort of what has actually changed that's made identity impossible to simply just treat as that piece of background infrastructure. And now something that is the connective tissue to every single operation within the business.
It's a good point. I mean, dynamic, identity is dynamic, right? It's always changing. It's shifting, and it really needs to be contextual. We're all used to, and we still have it at times, a username and a password, right? That was the old school way of doing it. Now they're shifting to biometrics, right? Password lists, and then you throw in, you hit the nail on the head. One thing that we deal with a lot is we're a modern company that's moving very quick. And when we're bringing in new technologies, it's learning on the enterprise to understand identity is the key piece to make this work. I don't care if it's an HR system like Workday or if it's a CRM like Zoho or Salesforce, right? If you don't have identity set up, then it's going to be either introducing new risk or it's going to make it very difficult to manage who is getting access and being able to move around efficiently. So it used to be where these systems from EDR to firewalls to your SIM would be really make independent decisions on their own, right? Now it's getting into where identity is really kind of making those kind of contextualized decisions. And like you said, bringing them all together. It's that core that is giving that intelligence to say, okay, should this user have the ability to go here? Why are they all of a sudden in a different location, or why is their behavior a little bit risky because they're accessing something they haven't accessed in the past 6 months, right? And so
Right.
these systems are no longer making independent decisions. They're now relying on identity to give them that intelligence to make a more contextualized decision overall. So it's really, again,
Yeah.
I look at it as, and it's a buzzword, the core of my security program, and hence the heavy investment on identity is identity, because of the impact it can have, not only from a security but from an operational side.
So I want to come back to your identity program and the innovative work that you're doing with it, Corey, in a second. But you touched on something that I think is really important. And I read George Kurtz off the back of CrowdStrike's acquisition of Signal this morning said attackers aren't breaking in anymore, they're logging in. And for me, the focus in market over the last couple of decades has been on the control points around authentication. And actually, our challenge to dynamically gift the proper secure access going forward is around authorization. Should these particular identities be accessing these assets at that point in time for that particular reason? And I appreciate that's a really difficult challenge. But for me, the frameworks that all of my teams, when I was running identity programs, have used, and I'm sure you've observed this too, historically aren't fit to then support those dynamic design principles, right? They're pretty static. If you look at even ABAC, but like particularly like so attribute-based access control, but even roles-based access control, they cannot adapt to circumstantial access in real time, and everything's going to be happening at runtime as we move forward, particularly with AI agents. Just before we touch on, because I guess this will be the foundation of maybe some of the changes you're making in your new program, what have you observed from those frameworks that we've used historically? Do you think they're really fit for purpose anymore? And can they actually last into supporting the kind of access and identity design that we need for the future?
It's a good question. I think it's, to me, I've lived in organizations where maybe they're on-prem and they don't need that new level of technology to manage a manufacturing location, right? Or a plant floor. Keep it simple, make it work. Don't introduce anything else on that end. But what that does not cover is all the people that live on the knowledge worker side that are traveling, that are want to do marketing and creativity stuff and utilizing their BYOD. Every organization deals with, hey, I have a Mac and I want to bring that in and connect to everything that I want to connect to that I've done in the past, or I got a new phone or an iPad or whatever that is. So to me, we've thrown out the term adaptive RBAC, right? RBAC is a big word that is thrown out there as a standard. In my opinion, that's going to be a legacy type standard here in the future, because you have to be adaptive to the work environment and the workforce that you're managing. You're going to have things like behavior, right? A lot of organizations from the authorization perspective are dealing with, are you who you say you are? Right. And, when it comes to hiring, there's issues on, is it this person truly the person they say they are, to, is this person the one that's actually connecting to our system? So for me, you have to be flexible as you're designing these new systems out there. And the use of AI is allowing for that. It's bringing in that ability to make, more educated decisions. But it's also taking into account the behavioral aspects of the user that is connecting to your system, or the system that is connecting to your environment as well, and adapt accordingly. And that's where, I think organizations struggle, and we're trying to get there. But you're taking, like for us, an organization that's been around for collectively over 100 years, right, and been through a lot of transitions. All of a sudden, it's like, hey, we got to change our full mindset here, and to think more into the future and be ready for that, especially with the big investment that we're putting in place.
But even an organization maybe that old then, I mean, in my head, you mentioned earlier, like there are more simple use cases, right? Like, for example, on-prem access workflows, which are far more binary between A and B, let's say, with very basic integration. But see, in my head, I just think agentic orchestration is eventually going to completely rip all of that asunder. I think the allure of having sort of context engineering at scale between all these digital identities that have a form of autonomy, a form of cognition, albeit basic, is going to be so attractive to enterprise operations that it is going to fundamentally usher in a new architecture for the business. And I speak about this as a consistent theme, not only through security, but I think the fact that we are in this new epoch of technology, and it's a bit like the Model T for Ford, right? I think this is going to be a new kind of factory model of the way operations run. Like, do you think access can actually deliver that? Because for me, it's like the most important key at the center of all of this. And it's something that I actually think in security, we focus on a very myopic piece of identity and access and haven't really taken the approach of looking at it as part of enterprise operations.
I mean, you're spot on that last comment there about how we've kind of kept it, behind that security curtain, right? And that's been the struggle even for me. I came from organizations that identity, maybe they didn't even have an identity program. It was just a thing we did, right? So now it's my largest investment. So it's going to go back to your question. For me, it's a matter of a lot of organizations are going to have to get there. Now, is it going to be one where you're just going to pull that trigger and have these agents deployed throughout your environment and you're going to trust the decisions you're making? Most likely not, right? It's kind of that mentality of verify, 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 then trust, but also have a human in the loop throughout that trust process, right? But you're also finding it's a risk tolerance conversation too. You have board members that potentially are board members for other companies or they're executives, and they may have different views of how to adopt and their risk tolerance to if an organization like ours wants to move quickly and be, we're shifting to a retail focus. How do we get there faster, right? We have new leadership in, and one of those is, hey, let's go with AI. And for my side is, as we are looking at new technologies on the identity side, we can't ignore those that are coming across with that AI capability in place or driven by AI as their core capability versus, okay, hey, we do identity, now we can do a little AI and see if it helps. These new ones coming out are like, this is AI driven, and here's how the improvements can be made, and here's how we can, like you said, not just focus on security, but improve the operations of the full enterprise, because that's where identity really can provide value to an organization, is outside of security, in my opinion.
Right. And I think you touched on a really important theme there around risk tolerance and a return on investment mentality in the concept of enterprise operations and not just security. And I've written on this extensively throughout my career, particularly with my background in quantitative risk modeling. And for me, the whole driver for that kind of practice was to empower board members and senior decision leaders to be more risk tolerant, to understand that every risk calculation has an adverse side and an upside. And I think identity is one of the key turning points in security that can actually usher in that mental model a lot quicker than any other aspect is done, because to your point, it is going to materially affect the entire end-to-end flow of enterprise operations in a way that probably other security technologies haven't quite touched upon. Just from your experience, you said it's a very old organization, Valvoline, right? But you're going through this sort of change where you're looking to speed up, you're looking to get efficiency gains. Are you finding that both, and I'd love you to answer this from two perspectives, are you finding that the business is wanting to be slightly more risk tolerant, to be a bit more aggressive, to gain competitive advantage, but also how's that actually materially affecting the kind of culture within the security team? Are they adapting to that readily? Because I know security guys love to just lock everything down and protect it, but sometimes it's actually about not taking the optimum, kind of security route and actually driving business outcome.
Yeah, you're seeing my reaction as you're unfolding that question, right? So to kind of hit on how is the business adoption or what's their risk tolerance, right? Especially from an identity perspective. I'll be honest, like they're open for that. It's a general tolerance of, hey, we know we have things that need to improve, right? The business is actually the one driving a lot of, we want to integrate more and more of our solutions and our day-to-day into the identity program. And it's really been myself and others within my team hitting on that, educating them over the past couple of years on why it's so important to have that integration across the whole enterprise. And I'm big on, there's so many neat technologies and ways of doing things, but if they're all living in their own little world, right, on their own little island, nothing works well, in my opinion. That drives me nuts, right? Point solutions that are good at what they do by themselves, but the value is to the organization. That's why we're here, right? That's why I do what I do. Now, on the question of what does that mean for me and even legal, I'll be honest, like I sat in on a workshop last week on just AI in general, which there was some identity stuff, and the bringing in the business and talking about all the possibilities that you can have with AI, and then me sitting in the background, I was slightly freaking out, to be honest, because it's like, I want to support it. We're doing our own AI stuff within security, right? But that's different than saying, hey, let's bring in finance and marketing and start managing all this data and moving it around and building our own hyper agents and being able to utilize all these different use cases, from order to cash to fleet management, stuff like that, to where, the question I pose is like, what truly defines, are we ready for this, right? Who makes that decision? Is that a me decision? Is that an executive decision higher up than me? Even as simple as Copilot, what is that line in the sand on Copilot ready? So, but on the identity side, I will say the adoption and the support that I'm getting on this transformation is huge. I have a board meeting next week and I am reporting on this. And it is something where from a budget perspective to general, when we have our kickoff meeting and stakeholder meetings, people are in and they're engaged. And that's great, especially when it comes to security. You don't get that a whole lot. But you also realize, and it gets back to our original kind of conversation, people are ready to get away from just having a username and password and changing it every 180 days or every 360, whatever it is, right? To where I just want to walk up, it sees me, boom, I'm in. I want to onboard quickly. I want to offboard quickly. I don't want to deal with spreadsheets for compliance, all that stuff. So the adoption is there. The risk tolerance is there. Now it's me scrambling, and an organized scramble, I will say, on getting ready for it, which is what we're in the middle of right now.
Hit on 3 or 4 themes, and I have to cover them because I just think they're all salient to this discussion, right? And the first is, and this can be very brief, but you just mentioned there around compliance, right? In my view, identity has been the sort of the apogee, the top, the apex of all of our compliance programs. Every control audit, SOC 1, SOC 2, SOCs, you name it, all of them are sort of underpinned by our identity controls. And yet the workflows constantly break, and and they become the gateway, the first step in the failure of controls as a threat event is executed. Sometimes I'm just sat there going, why do we have them? Like, do you think those kind of compliance frameworks have actually done us any good? Because for me, it's lulled us into these kind of maturity scales and models where we're sort of arbitrarily ticking boxes to make it seem like we're improving. But to your point, it's like 101 when you start security. Identity is one of the foundational topics you focus on. 20 years down the line of 30 years maybe of an industry profession and practice, and we don't seem to be anywhere near even solving some of the basic workflows and access and identity.
You're exactly right. It's interesting when you speak to others, especially like right now I'm going through this. You're like, well, why now? What's causing that, right? And then you get into the weeds. It's like, yeah, we have that same problem. We just kind of accept that. That's just the ways of working here. And well, I don't accept it, right? Hence where we're at. On the compliance side, it's your question of, okay, is there value there? Like, what's it doing? I mean, it's unfortunately, especially as a public company, you're forced into that, right? From a SOX, IT general controls, ITGC as we call it, and so nobody enjoys it. I've dedicated teams to it, resources, which then, okay, that's a budget line item, but it's also understanding they're not the only ones doing it. When you're a control owner, that's a lot of work. And if you don't rely on like the identity solutions to help automate that, and then really partner with your external auditing firms to approve that, because that's the thing is, spreadsheets work, spreadsheets are painful, but automation is huge. But then you got to prove out if that tool is really doing its job and being compliant. I look at them as a foundation. It's, you want to pass the audit, but what are you doing with that information between review cycles, right? If you're doing a quarterly basis, you'll get the, hey, does this person still need access from a UAR perspective to this system? You you know you should be able to use identity to show data on what they're actually doing in there versus a yes, no, I just want to move on answer. Like, okay, is Corey, did he even do anything in that password vault last quarter? No, then why the hell does he still have access, right? And use that to build and put good security practices in. And for me, it's actually allow me to justify some budget to say I want to bring in this IGA solution that can not only bring value on the operational security side, but it also streamlines and helps manage our compliance program in a more effective manner. As I'm sitting in these meetings, one of the individuals that is a high stakeholder and puts a lot of input is my head of ITGCs, general controls, because he sees the value of identity and where it can really make his job easier or more streamlined. So,
and we love a happy management. And before I get cancelled by ISO or blackballed by the before I get cancelled by ISO and blacklisted by the Big Four, I actually did. You are correct. They do serve a function, but I think the interesting outcome of it, particularly, and this is particularly around identity, is that the identity failures reflect the chasm between organizational assumptions and technical gaps that we actually have to operate with. And for me, these plans are like the military phrase, no plan survives contact. It's like we think the business operates like this. End users feel like I have an account, a set of basic credentials. Okay, I've now got 2FA, an extra set, but fine. I should just be able to get into whatever asset I need. Forgetting that it is a interconnected web of infrastructure, gluing all of those things together. And you've very well articulated that challenge is now grown exponentially because we now have, particularly with MCP, an identity mesh where agents are going to start crawling about. And I think I'd love your thoughts on this. For me, it's not even about the security piece from, let's say, a confidentiality perspective in the first instance. For me, and this comes back to the point we mentioned at the start, the challenge will be that autonomy, which is kind of where the enterprise architecture nirvana's going, is predicated with automation, something we've also been striving for in controls for a very long time, and we've been very poor at it because the environment's complex, etc. Now, automation is then predicated on consistency and repeatability. So consistency and repeatability are the two fundamental design principles that we have to have with the data layer and therefore with the workflows throughout the identity sort of fabric that we're building out. My sort of initial concern will be that automation will just start breaking operationally. Workflows will just start snapping. We'll basically change them from manual into a sort of unknown form of automation because, to your point, the business wants to run forward with AI, like you mentioned in that board meeting. And actually, stuff is just going to break. People won't be able to access things and all hell will break loose. That challenge for the CISO, and we'll come on to maybe, is that the challenge for the CISO in a second? That challenge is, for me, far more consequential, both in terms of loss exposure, as well as actually trying to come up with a fix for that, than, let's say, mitigating a potential access breach. Thoughts?
I agree. And I haven't really put hard thought to that, but in just to make sure I'm aligned, it gets into your question is more around trusting automation could potentially put you in a place where what do you do when it breaks, right? versus other alternatives.
Well, like
Is that accurate?
yeah. I mean, you made a great point nestled in one of your previous responses, which is that identity is not just a lone game with security as the only player. In reality, it's one of the few programs that strip right across the enterprise end to end, impacting end users as well as, technical systems. And so for me, and this is why I think in a second we'll come on to ownership, because that's at the crux of the matter. But for me, it's like, if it does break, and it's going to break, when we then suddenly deploy this automation at scale, and of course that automation is going to be very swiftly moving to forms of basic autonomy, how the hell are we going to even fix that in real time? I mean, you and I have dealt with hundreds of incidents over our career. It's not going to look good.
No, it's not. I've been in situations where something else caused an identity core system to go down. And honestly, it's almost like, you utilize a breach to get budget, right? That actually happened in the time frame that I was looking to push on identity. So to allow me, an operational issue caused my core authentication system to go down, which then you realize, like, nobody can do anything. Like, this thing is a tier 0 solution that, oh my gosh, we knew it was important, but it's like, if I can't log in to a support server to support the other stuff going down, then how am I supposed to do my job? So it gets back into, well, you think it's identity and it just controls joiners, leavers, movers, and logging into your laptop and all that. But like, if there's an issue on the operational side and a support admin cannot get in because the authentication system is down, then how are they supposed to support other things going on in the organization? So the struggle is designing that resiliency overall to where it's still a core system, but you have the redundancy, resiliency, adaptability in place, whatever you want to call it, to where if it does go down, people can still do their job outside of just security in a sense. And that's where a couple of years ago, the big one happened. And it's like, oh, okay, here we go. We got to design this a lot better and have an architecture that is a lot more flexible in place. And, we haven't solved that. We've identified the problem and we're working through it on our new architecture and structure there. But it's also getting back into, when you talk resiliency and that, you got to test that out too. You got to constantly try and hit that and say, okay, if this does go down.
Well, it's funny how identity becomes that sort of specter that's always haunting everything we do, and something that we always magnetize back to as being central to the challenge that we face, both within security and enterprise technology. And just so our listeners don't think that I'm ignoring things like attacks and breaches, I remember sitting on the advisory board of an anti-ransomware company very recently. And one of the challenges, you mentioned resiliency, that we were facing there was, well, architecturally, okay, we're going to spin up, like particularly in cloud environments, we can spin up code base of applications again quite quickly. We can restore system functionality in isolation. What happens when everything's SSO and we can't access any of the applications or any of the file stores? Yeah. and so, but recovering Active Directory, all the forests underneath there, all of the access intelligence is extremely difficult. It is a serious engineering challenge that I think, like I said, affects every aspect of what we do, right from the actual runtime of operations through to resiliency. And I guess that's a kind of slight segue onto one of the kind of final topic areas that I really want to touch on. And I want to touch on this in the context of your new identity program, which I would love you for maybe just give listeners just a brief sort of intro on sort of how you're changing this. But maybe you can do it in the context of you driving this as a CISO and against the backdrop of, should identity, given the broad scope of challenge we've just been discussing, sit with the CISO, or actually should it be housed somewhere else?
Yeah, it's happy to give some background and kind of lean into, where I've had some thoughts and others as well. But, from our side, as we went through a heavy divestiture within the organization that shifted us from being both retail and manufacturing to just being, on my side, retail only. right? And so now you're dealing with a different customer, a different consumer, and different architecture on that. And not saying we didn't have that in place, but you're spending 50% here and 50% here. Now it's 100% on this side, and you have disparate systems. And so what drove us to really put this in place was not only, if you look back, and I don't have stats top of mind right now, but the breaches lately and the past couple of years have majority are something with a credential. You're still going to have your 0 days and items like that, and you're going to have ones that you don't hear about, but the social engineering stuff, as simple as that is, and you do a pen test and you want, hey, what they're looking for is the creds, and the creds that'll get you the keys of the kingdom and start, having a little fun within your environment, right? And so the data was there. That was the easy part. Now the hard part was saying, we have these technologies that we spend millions on over time, right? And I want to pull them out, or hey, I want to do a deep dive assessment. So we were able to get approval to come in and just look hard at every process that identity was a part of and say, where's our gaps? Where does it support? And it gets back into our conversation around, that's when you really realize that it's not just supporting my security team or the dev team, it's supporting HR, right? It's supporting marketing, the product team. And when you have a company that can come in and outline all that and put that into one pretty picture, a lot of lines on paper that, so these are all the things connected, that allowed me to say, okay, now we know it's an integral part of the business, right? That's great. We all understand that all the way to the CEO. Now, my problem is if I just cut that line right there, what does that do? Okay, who's impacted? All right, what about this one over here? Or hey, who manages that? I don't know. It's typically LDAP. I don't know anything about it, but it works, right? Or we have franchises. Hey, how are we managing them? So you throw in compliance, you throw in regulatory, the legal side of things. As we're a consumer-based company now, in a sense, how are you managing access to the privacy side of their data, the PII, right? And so educating them on all the different areas that identity hits, and then saying, okay, we need to simplify this to where we are not impacted by one of those icons on that paper or that line getting cut, where this quarter of the business cannot run and we don't have good recovery processes in place. And so on us, that's a 2-year journey. And we just literally last week chose our new tech stack. So that's how long it's taken, because what we realized too, it's easy to sit there and say, I'm going to go replace my PAM solution, right? I'm going to go replace my authorization or authentication solution. Well, you also have to realize what else is going on in the business, that you got to time it right to where if I'm doing that, we're putting in a new HR system, as we did, I can't do that. So, all right, let's pause for 8 months, shift. And now, when are we going? When are we going? Let's hit the gas. So we finally hit the gas last quarter, last fall. And we have a good core team and we're going, but it's never fast enough.
It's a sizable challenge.
Biggest thing that I've had to deal with. I've told my wife and others, this will make or break me on this, because it's not a 1 year, it's not a 2 year, it's potentially 3 year.
It's going to be the making of you. I've got every faith. You're looking super well, super healthy, super happy. If anyone's watching this, they're gonna go, I need
crying every night. It's all good, having nightmares. But
you hit on it at the end, because I went through in my last CISO role, I went through a $25 million workday rollout. That was happening across the business, right? But at the same time, I was concurrently deploying SailPoint. And it's in some ways right, but in some ways you think, oh, that's great, because that's the intersection where you can design it from scratch. But we had 830 applications in the business, many duplicative instances, but slightly, different configurations. And so the access needed to be set up differently. And this was heavy M&A. So similar example, right, where you're faced with that kind of operational overlap, all of those challenges on the business side. But I love that you're taking a loss exposure approach in the first instance, i.e. working backwards from what are going to be the biggest impacts to runtime business operations for access, and just working your way down the list. Because I think if you look at resiliency planning in financial services, which is where I spent most of my career, that's exactly how we work on resiliency architecture at a business level. Like, what are your mission critical processes, and you work that way. Now, when I listen to you speak just there, it sounds like you're absolutely in the know and the right person to be driving this. And I'm sure every business is desperate for a Corey Kaemming. But lend me your thoughts on, like, through that experience, do you think identity should be sitting with the CISO? Or do you, because it, like, one brief analogy I'll give is we have a chief data officer because data is a ubiquitous challenge touching every part of the business. This whole discussion that we've just had has pretty much been shining the light on the fact identity shares very similar traits to that, and not just about confidentiality protection in security. Maybe it's time for a change or not?
We're going to see that, right? And like anything else, it's all based on the organization. I've doubled my team in a year and a half, right?
Wow.
And so, but we're also not an organization that has a bunch of chiefs in a sense of like the data officer, privacy officer, risk officer, compliance officer. We have those right here, there. But on the identity side, especially, I mean, I've got a good identity leader on my end. He's so I had to make the decision of changing leadership within that process and brought in a new leader that has that experience from a strategic level doing these things. And so I've told him this, he's made my job a lot easier, right? But you see somebody in that role that could roll up into like a chief identity officer, a CISO as they call it, right? And those could report to like a CTO, or like you're seeing with the CISO role where potentially they report more into the business because that's who they're really supporting overall. And even on my end, governing it to a point as well, right? The hard part on identity is, and we went through it, you have identity as a risk, right? Identity logging and audits and all that live within compliance or your SOC and SIM. You have the identity detection and response, ITDR now, has identity in the name, but doesn't live with my identity program. That lives with my, security operations center and engineering side, right? Because that is identifying the threats, and the DR is the key piece of that. So there's aspects that I see that are a must-have in identity within security. But as companies evolve and they realize it supports the business and not just security and tech, I hope to see that. I hope to see that the CISO role gets its due.
I remember I used to work for State Street Bank, and I remember when I worked there that the entire enterprise identity program was held under a chief admin officer. So this was someone on the very top C-suite level, alongside the CIO and CTO. And at the time, it's not that it made no sense to me, but at the time, in technology risk, I felt like all the time, oh God, that should be with us. We need to be, re-engineering these workflows, etc. Now I look back, particularly having, done multiple CISO roles and ran SOCs where I've been overseeing breaches. You're absolutely right. I remember one breach that we had, and the recovery challenge that we had in terms of recovering operations was because we could not get someone from the business on the phone over the weekend, despite the fact, obviously, all of us were working. And my team, probably 10 times harder than I was, couldn't get the business person on the phone to configure the front end access to the application. And we lost like 2 days of transactional processing as a result of it that we had to recover. And so when I looked back, I was like, well, a lot of our loss exposure from an identity standpoint has happened through OPEX loss, not through the fact that we couldn't control, the recovery immediately through completely owning the reprovisioning and bringing access back up online. And so I do think there is a healthy case to be made for broadening the scope of identity, if only to prevent that myopic security mindset of, actually, we deal with a lot of this around the C of the triad. And of course, I know you and I have had multiple discussions about this and other aspects of security. we're pivoting towards really a lot of focus on integrity and availability. Security is moving closer and closer, if not already violently there at runtime. And if we can't operate at the velocity, back to that dynamicism you mentioned at the start, I think that's where we're going to be really, the role almost is going to be challenged by other executives going forward. And to your point, I think the closer enforcement into enablement and business functions is going to do the world of good for security moving forward.
Identity's hard, right? And I fully respect it. And I'm challenged every day to even understand what they're saying sometimes, because it's just, if you live in the world of security, a lot of people are security ops, right? That's kind of how they got in. Red teaming, they're security analysts. Ask them about identity, get them in the mix, because and this is not bashing anybody in the role, but they're probably going to have a hard time for them to understand it and really know what that takes. And, I look at identity, and it's an operational thing. With us, one of the big wins is self-service password reset, right? It's onboarding. Well, is that security or is that just ops? You want somebody to join. Yeah, you want the right person to join, and they have the right necessary access and the only necessary access. But again, that is an operational thing that is really different for a CISO to manage, right? We have our ops area, but it's challenged me in a good way. But I also think it's large enough where it deserves that necessary focus at a higher level. But again, I think it's org based too. Not every org can just say, "Hey, you're a CISO now. Here you go," right?
Yeah, right. No, I think you're right. And if it's any consolation to our listeners, I spent many days in my career not having a clue what anyone was talking about. Not that should deter anyone working in security. It's part and parcel of the fun and games of the job.
Yeah, I was thinking to myself this morning, you get to a certain point in leadership where you don't need to be that person, right? I think me and you probably both grew up where we're techies, right? We love that. And I get annoyed with myself if somebody starts talking technical, and I'm like, I don't know what he's saying. I don't know what's going on. But then I realize I am a people motivator leader that moves the needle, manages strategy, and gets the right people in the right spot. And with identity, that is a big piece. And I mean, leaders want to have more people because potentially that gives them, a higher value, but you have to be real and say, this makes more sense to be over here. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't.
It's funny. I wanted to end on I was going to just throw a question at you to try and be on the spot to stop you giving great answers, to try and challenge you. And I was going to say, what's one thing where people really think that is integral to security and identity, but actually it's meaningless? But you gave me a thought there, which is almost on the hiring strategy standpoint. I think going forward, and to your point historically, as security professionals, we would have listed technical certifications, definitely a very threat focused mindset to maybe IAM analysts, PAM analysts that we're bringing in. And the more I think about it, it's almost, you really want enterprise architects. You want people that are going to be able to work cross-functionally throughout the business, have the technical discipline, but that technical discipline cannot be just restricted to SailPoint, CyberArk, Ping, AAD. It has got to be, you understand how ServiceNow works, you understand how Workday works. You've got to work through all of those enterprise systems, and with the sort of sponsors and champions of those systems on the business side that don't have the technical background as security professionals. And I think that's probably one of the most interesting pivots for security from a hiring standpoint when it comes to identity.
It is. And, tech changes, people should not, right, on that end. And it's just like, and there's nothing against SAP. You have people that just know SAP, then all of a sudden leadership's like, no, we're going to Oracle. And okay, well, I don't know it. Okay, well, hey, we're going to bring somebody new in. And I don't want anybody to be in that position. You functionally need to know how that solution, works on our side. We're not relying on tech. We are, but we're not selling the tech. We're relying more on the capability of that function than, hey, let's make sure it goes to SailPoint or make sure it goes to Okta. It's like, no, let's just make sure we have an IGA function that can do this, this, and this. I don't want the user to know what that is. I want them to know, okay, this is not even how it functions, but it's doing its job. And so we're shifting the mindset on that end. But Yeah, you need to understand and hire the people that are willing to learn and have that ability to be utility players, at times. And when we go through, hey, who's high potential or tier one, it's every year. It's like, well, this person's stepped up and did this. They know how to bring in this people, the social aspect. I've told my kids, I've learned over my time. I was a CCNA by the time I graduated high school, right? I learned hard that if I can't talk to people and bring the right people in the room and get them communicating and take a step back and listen and learn versus I can write code. I will take that social person and somebody that can be engaging and talk every single time, right? In my opinion. So, and it's hard. It's hard now with what we have at our fingertips. So
It is, but having that emotional intelligence and that sort of empathy for what it's like being the end user in the business, I think you referenced it there. It's like almost self-branding the program rather than talking about a sell point or a cyber arc, right? Exactly. I think the more sort of behavioral science techniques that we leverage from almost like taking what the business does with their CMO externally and using those techniques internally can be massively effective in changing the hearts and minds, and then actually getting people behind your security programs and changes in the identity space rather than people sort of opposing
yeah,
them. But
yeah, that's
look,
us. We're
I
moving to a service. That's what we're doing. We're going from, and I meant to say it earlier, we're moving from not just providing a solution, but a service, a business outcome driven service is our goal on that end.
and look, I hope many of our listeners have taken notes because I think you're doing some really interesting things in that space, Corey. Um, Let me just take this opportunity to thank you ever so much for speaking with us. It's fascinating to sort of go over, I think, an area which is now going far beyond the confines of security into the business, and to hear about some of the innovative work that you're doing. So, for all of our listeners, thank you for listening to The Watchtower. This has been Ash Hunt. You can find me at LinkedIn as usual. Corey, where can they find you?
Same thing. LinkedIn's the best route. Like to do some speaking engagements here and there. So hopefully see some people on the road. But yeah, LinkedIn is the best way to get a hold of me. And thank you, Ash. This is great. I appreciate the partnership here.
That's great. Looking forward to catching up again soon. Everyone else, thanks ever so much.